Hi, today we're going to read Summer Dog. My new home was in a large room off of the Becker's house, which I learned was called a garage. I shared the garage with the truck that had hit Moon and me, a car, and lots of other things that reminded me of my old home at the Marions. Gardening tools, buckets, ropes, some mice, and 3 families of barn swallows. The barn swallow parents had built their muddy nests in the eaves, and each pair was raising 4 babies. They were all very noisy. I didn't know much about being someone's pet and living in a home, but I had peeked in enough windows in Claremont and other towns Moon and I had passed through to know that a lot of pet dogs live inside the main house with humans. However, I had also seen plenty of dogs living outside in yards, and anyway, the garage wasn't bad. On the day that the Bickers brought me home from the vet, Marjorie and Donald helped me out of the car, and Mrs. Becker said, "Now, Daisy, this is going to be your bed." She pointed to a puffy round cushion in the corner of the garage near an open window. The cushion was dusty and covered with a layer of black and white hairs. "And here is your water and food." She pointed to 2 dishes near the bed. One was filled with water. The other was filled with something I investigated immediately and found to be pieces of chicken, bits of bacon, and some scrambled eggs and toast. "See," Mrs. Becker went on, "you're a lucky stray. None of that dog food for you. You get our table scraps." I cleaned the bowl in a flash, even though I had eaten breakfast at the vet. Marjorie took me by the collar and led me to my bed. "This is all yours." "And here," she said, "and here, this is your very own sheep." She set the stuffed animal next to my bed. "Why don't you lie down now and take a nap?" "No, let her come inside. I want to show her my room," said Donald. "Absolutely not," replied Mrs. Becker. "You know the rule, Donald. No pets inside. Daisy is an outdoor dog. Why don't you play with her in the yard?" "Yard. Put the leash on her so she won't run away." That day, Donald and Marjorie attached the leash to my collar just like Rachel used to do, and they walked me around their yard, which was big, but not as big as the Marions. I could see other houses not far away. The yard was pleasant, with trees and gardens and insects, and small rodents hiding in the gardens. I walked until I began to limp on my newly healed leg. "Oh, she's tired," said Marjorie. "Let's put Daisy to bed." Donald and Marjorie returned me to the garage, carefully pulling the big door down behind us. Then Marjorie led me to my bed before unclipping the leash. "Here," she said, "you rest now." I was left alone in the garage, but I didn't mind. I was tired, and so I did rest on the bed, even though it was smelled of other dogs. At the end of the day, Mrs. Becker filled my food dish with more scraps, which I ate quickly. Later, when darkness had fallen, Marjorie and Donald sang me a song that they said was supposed to help me go to sleep. For a while, each day at the Becker's house passed in much the same way as the day before. In the morning, Mrs. Becker would fill my food dish with scraps. Later, Marjorie and Donald would play in the yard with me. They stopped clipping my leash to the collar after Mrs. Becker said she guessed I knew where my home was now. Marjorie and Donald threw toys for me to chase after, and we tumbled in the grass. When they grew tired of playing, they would lead me back to the garage. At the end of the day, Mrs. Becker would fill my food dish again, and more often than not, Marjorie and Donald would come to the garage to say goodnight to me when it was their bedtime. Then one day, Mrs. Becker brought me my breakfast as usual, but Marjorie and Donald didn't stop to play. They ran through the garage, calling, "Bye, Daisy. We're going swimming today. See you later." I didn't see them until the next day, although Mrs. Becker did bring me my supper. After that, sometimes Marjorie and Donald came to the garage to play with me, and sometimes they didn't, but I didn't mind much when they forgot. The Beckers had stopped closing me into the garage during the day, and I had discovered that I was free to roam around outside. The scents and sounds of summertime called to me, and I spent my days in the grass and gardens with the bees and bugs and rodents. When the afternoon shadows grew long, I would return to the garage for supper. This was almost like living at the Marions, when Boone and I would roam the woods all day and return to our shed at night. Sometimes, on the days when Donald and Marjorie forgot to play with me, I would creep up the stairs at the front of their screen and stand at the door trying to see through the screen. "Hi, Daisy," the Beckers would call out if they noticed me, but they didn't open the door. Until now, I had thought pet dogs were never lonely. I was wrong. Late one afternoon, I was sitting in the woods behind the Beckers' house when I noticed something. I was chilly. The days were long, but they were cooler than before. I noticed this most in the mornings when the garage felt damp, and in the evenings when I would curl around and around on my bed when I would turn around and around on my bed before curling into a tight ball in order to stay as warm as possible. When I had first arrived at the Beckers' The nights in the garage had sometimes been hot and stuffy, even with the windows open, but not anymore. I sat on my haunches in the woods, listening for the sounds of animals, of predators, listening to the wind and the leaves and the calling of the birds. I looked above me and saw that one branch of maple had turned a brilliant color that I think may have been red, although red is another color I can't distinguish. And an ash tree was already starting to lose its yellow leaves. Autumn? Okay. Autumn was coming. It wasn't here yet, but it was on its way. I stood up, yawned, and stretched with my rump in the air. Then I sauntered back to the garage for supper. I waited and waited, but no one brought food. Mr. Bucker, who had been out for the day, returned in his car, parked the garage, patted me on the head without looking at me, and saying, "Hi there, Sasha," as he went into the house. I sat on my bed and waited. No food. I sat at the garage door and waited. No food. I walked to the front of the house and looked through the screen door. Nobody noticed me. I walked to the garage and found that the door had been pulled down. Maybe later, someone would see that I wasn't on my bed, but I don't think that happened because no one called for me. That night, I sat by the garage door until the lights in the house went out. Then I lay down under a rhododendron bush and slept in the garden. The next morning, Mrs. Becker raised the garage door and found me sitting on the driveway. "Oh, my goodness, Daisy, I forgot all about you. I'll bring you your breakfast in a minute." And she did, but she forgot to feed me again in the evening, so I caught a squirrel for dinner and spent my night on the lawn chair. After that, the Beckers forgot my food more often than they remembered it, and I was glad of my hunting skills. When my dish was left empty, I scoured the woods. Water was no problem because I could drink from the neighbor's bird bath and also from a swimming pool I had discovered, but I had to be careful because the people who owned the pool would shoo me away if they saw me. One morning, I woke on the lawn chair and had a drink from the bird bath, then trotted to the Becker's garage to check my dishes. The garage was open, the dishes were empty, but I barely noticed. There was a lot of activity, and I paused to watch. The car and the truck stood in the driveway with their doors open. Piled on the floor of the garage were boxes and cases and heavy-looking bags. Mr. and Mrs. Becker were trying to fit all the boxes and cases and bags into the car and the truck. They were huffing and groaning and not talking much. But Marjorie and Donald were talking a lot, and they didn't sound happy. "I can't believe summer is over," said Marjorie. She kicked at the box. "I can't believe we have to go back to school," said Donald. "No more swimming, no more rides in the boat. Back to the stinky old city. Kids, will you give us a hand?" said Mrs. Becker. "Marjorie, where are your suitcases in the garage?" "They're here. Everything is packed." Marjorie kicked at the box again. "Oh, look," said Donald. "There's Daisy. Hey, she's not wearing her collar. What happened to her collar?" "You took it off her last week, remember?" said Marjorie. "Where did you put it?" "Kids, please," said Mrs. Becker. "A little help here." Marjorie and Donald each lifted a carton. They carried the cartons to the truck. I trotted to the woods to hunt for my breakfast. When I returned to the Beckers later that morning, the car and the garage and the truck were gone, and the garage door was closed. The door remained closed all day. I checked the other door and the one at the front with the screen and found it was closed. In the evening, I looked for the lawn chair and discovered that it was no longer on the Beckers' terrace. The yard behind the house had been cleared of chairs and bicycles and toys. Even the big cooking machine and the pots with the flowers in them were gone. I slept under the rhododendron again. The next day I saw no sign of the Beckers. There was no sign of them the day after that, or the day after that, or the day after that, or the day after that. I decided to move on. Peace.